Shalom Mubaraka, Mishpaka, peace and blessings, family. In this video, I'm going to be explaining this Phoenician artifact that was found in Rio de Janeiro, specifically Paraíba, Brazil. And basically, it talks about a ship that went the wrong direction and landed in this area. So, most scholars today will just outright tell you guys that this is indeed fake. But see, the problem with that is this was discovered in 1872 by a plantation owner named Alves de Costa. Now, specifically, it was found by his slaves. His slaves were given the task of going to some rocks and breaking them down, and then they accidentally broke down this one rock into 4 pieces. They brought the rock to Alves de Costa, and they said, hey, look, this writing has words on it. Is this important? So Alves de Costa looked at it. He could not read the words, so he knew it was from another culture. So with that being said, he got the attention of the historical institution of Rio de Janeiro, the only historical institution in the area. And he said, hey, we found something that looks historical. What is it? So basically, he had his son write out a copy of it by hand and send it to the authorities. And the authorities knew it was Phoenician. Now, nowadays, they'll tell you it's fake. But here's the problem with that. At that time in 1871, only a small circle of less than 100 people on Earth total could read and write Phoenician. So this plantation owner was not one of them. Okay, he did not know how to read and write Phoenician, and nor did he know how to write that stuff in stone. On top of that, this plantation owner did not seek any notoriety, nor did he receive any money for his find, meaning there was no direct motive of faking this artifact. So basically, there was no reason for it to be fake. And I'm going to explain in just a second how I know it's real and how it makes a lot of sense as to why it is here. And also, I'm going to be explaining how it did not come from the Middle East at all. So with that being said, let's read the English translation of it. Also, guys, by the way, the Phoenician language of Tyre and Zidon is very similar to the Hebrew Yehudith, basically the Abar language. Not very similar. It's basically identical, honestly. So let's read it, the English translation. And it says, we are Sidonian Canaanites from the city of the mercantile king. That's Sidon. We were cast up on this distant shore, a land of mountains. We sacrificed a youth to the celestial gods and goddesses in the 19th year of our mighty king, Hiram, and embarked from Ezion Geber into the Red Sea. We voyaged with 10 ships and were at sea together for 2 years around Africa. But of course, in the text, it doesn't say Africa. It says Ham, or the land of Ham. Then we were separated by the hands of Baal, and we were no longer with our companions. So we have come here, 12 men and 3 women, into a new shore. Am I the admiral, a man who would flee? No. May the celestial gods and goddesses favor us well. So basically, this is written by an admiral of the king, Hiram, the same king that made a deal with Solomon to trade with Tarshish and Ophir. Now, anyway, this admiral is basically writing a letter to the king, letting him know that he did not intentionally flee away and he landed in this unknown area on accident. However, for some reason, this letter did not make it back to the king. Perhaps the people who landed there died of disease because they were stranded from civilization in the middle of perhaps the rainforest. So they were not able to get it back to the king in time. So it probably just stayed there. Understanding the deal that Solomon made with Hiram, the only 2 places that these ships were going to were Tarshish and Ophir. Now, we know that according to scripture, Tarshish is a land that is an island, all right? And we know that Tarshish is in Southeast Asia because there was peacocks there, there was ivory there, and there were apes, also known, well, specifically monkeys, not technically not apes, but monkeys there as well. And it would have to be in the Pacific islands of Southeast Asia, because peacocks can be found nowhere else. Ivory trade was a big thing in Southeast Asia and the Philippines. The Philippines specifically are the actual lands of Tarshish. And, I'll explain that in another video in the future. Since they were not going to Tarshish, they had to be going to Ophir, the land of gold. So they were being sent to Ophir. So they're supposed to be in the Andes. The Andes of South America was known to be filled with gold. In fact, many conquistadors they noted that the empire that was south of the Darien Gap, which is in Panama, the empire south would be the Incan Empire. They noted that empire had so much gold that they used gold for their everyday utensils, meaning their spoons, their bowls, cups. All of it was made out of gold. They didn't even value the metal that much. They made everything with it. That's how much gold was there. So some specific spot in the Andes we know has to be the land of Ophir, and that's where they were sent. However, they probably passed up this specific spot and went too far south and ended into the Drake Passage. They were sucked into the Drake Passage. You have to understand, the Drake Passage is so strong that it bent the land. As you can see in South America kind of at the bottom, it actually curves towards the east. And when you look at Antarctica, it curves toward the east as well, because the Drake Passage is a current, the strongest current on Earth, strong enough to actually bend the land itself. It's pushing all that water at extreme speeds. And then on top of the current, there's also a west wind that's pushing everything. So no matter how good of a sailor you are, your ship is going to be taken once it's getting in that Drake Passage. Only modern ships today can withstand that current. But ancient ships back then could not. So they were sucked into that current. There was nothing they can do about it. They must have passed up Ophir. They must have made it to Ophir and got, prideful and said, oh, let me go further south because there's probably even more gold there. I'm going to risk it. And they probably went too far south and they were sucked into the Drake Passage. And then when they finally got out of that strong grip of the Drake Passage, they tried probably to go back into the Drake Passage to get back to their land, but they couldn't because the Drake Passage pushed them back. So they was like, okay, the only thing we can do is go north. Probably we can go around this landmass and get back into the Red Sea somehow. So they went north, and going north from that specific region would land you right in Rio de Janeiro, would land you right in Periaba, Brazil, that specific spot. So that makes sense as to how they got there. Now, in the Middle East, if you're coming from Eziongabar in the Middle East, which is on the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula, that it makes absolutely no sense to end up all the way in Brazil. In fact, especially if you're going to either Tarshish or if you're going to Ophir, because Tarshish, as we know, is somewhere in Southeast Asia, which is east of the Middle East, and we know that Ophir, according to the Middle Eastern model, is somewhere in southwestern Saudi Arabia. So with that being said, you would have to make so many mistakes to end up in Brazil that it's ridiculous. It's almost impossible to be this idiotic, because in order to end up in Brazil from the Middle East, and you're trying to get either from Tarshish or to Ophir, let's say for example that we were trying to go to Ophir, you would first have to accidentally pass up Ophir, understandable, go too far south, and then you would hit the Horn of Africa. That's the first thing that would happen. But then you would have to purposely go east and go around the Horn of Africa and then continue to go south. So now you're intentionally going south. And it says that they were dealing with the land of Ham for 2 years. But so that means that they knew they were around the land of Ham. That means that they knew they were around the land of Ham. If you're going to Ophir, which is in Saudi Arabia, according to the Middle East, there was no need to deal with the land of Ham. If also you're going to Tarshish, which is in Southeast Asia, there's also no need to deal with the land of Ham, especially for 2 years. However, when you're in the American model, and like I noted, that the land of Ham did not only include just Africa. You got to understand, when you read Genesis, Ham had more children than Japheth or Shem. So the majority of humans on the planet are actually Hamites. And what we have to understand is Ham did not only settle in Africa, but he also settled in Central and South America. Actually, specifically the entire area ranging south of Arizona all the way to the tip of the Andes Mountains in South America. All that belonged to Ham. So they were dealing with Mexico, Panama. They were dealing with Peru. All these areas for 2 years. They were hitting every merchant dock and trading point that they could and get as much gold as they could to bring back to Hiram to please the king, to please Solomon, all of them, so they can get very known throughout the nation, to be looked at as heroes when they return back home. But what apparently happened was they went too far south and made one mistake. That one mistake was they went too far south. However, in the Middle East, they would have to make multiple mistakes. Now, when it says they were around the land of Ham for 2 years, that does not mean that they accidentally passed the land of Ham and it took them 2 years before they got to the Rio de Janeiro area. It actually means they were dealing with the land of Ham for 2 years, because it would take far less than 2 years to go around either Africa or South America. In fact, it would take longer to go from the Red Sea, also known as the California Gulf, and go all the way around South America than it would take to go from the Middle East into the modern Red Sea and go all the way around Africa. There's actually a longer journey to go around South America. But neither of those journeys take 2 years, which means they were not just sailing for 2 years straight. They were actually dealing purposely with these naval ports. Why were you dealing with the land of Ham in the Middle East? Because there were only 2 places that Hiram was sending ships to, and that was Tarshish and that was Ophir. Neither of those 2 places do you have to deal with the land of Ham if we're looking in the Middle Eastern perspective. But when we're looking in the American perspective, you have to deal with the land of Ham if you're getting to Ophir, because the land of Ophir had to be somewhere in the Andes region, and I explained how all of South America belonged to Ham. What came out of Ophir according to scripture? Not just gold, but precious stones. So South America has the precious stones, has the gold. So that's why I say that Ophir was indeed somewhere along the Andes. If we're coming from the Middle East, let's say they were trying to go to Tarshish, they would have to go the complete opposite direction. They were supposed to go east the entire time, but some reason they went south and then they went west. It's ridiculous. There's no way that they could have accidentally ended up in Brazil when they were trying to go to Tarshish or Ophir in the Middle Eastern model. So we know that they were coming from America and they were trying to go to another part of America. That's very clear. By the way, Tyre and Zidon are cities of Lebanon, which is Northern California and Southern Oregon. That's where King Hiram lived, and they sent ships to Ezion Geber, which is in the fork of the Colorado River, which leads into the Red Sea. It all makes sense, guys. It all makes sense.